Today, I'm joined again by marketing guru and storyteller extraordinaire, Dave McCaughan. Dave, welcome.
G'day, mate. Good to be back with you.
Glad that you can be here. Now, new life builders, the life stage that we really haven't seen before. I know it's been a topic of special interest to you for over 35 years. And really today, I'm interested in asking you some questions about the intersection of that and business. And really aging populations and the need to rethink, or to use one of your hashtags, retirement, is becoming a bigger issue. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Oh, look, no doubt. As we talked about last time, Australia is not at the crisis end of the aging population thing. Countries like Italy, Greece, Japan, Korea have a much bigger immediate problem. But the reality is the population is aging. There are more and more people in that sort of 50s, 60s, 70s age groups. And we still live in a marketplace where, especially in the business world, there's a lot of ageism goes on. It's hard for people in their 50s, 60s and beyond to get new jobs, change careers, they can't risk doing something different because they won't get a head start. A lot of times they're the first out, if in tough times, and the predictions continue that we might hit more tough times, and that will be the case. And then what do you do if you're 55, 60 and you lose your job, or you have to give up your job, or if you're just bored, brainless because you've been doing the same thing for 35, 40 years, And as I always point out, the highlight of why I call it New Life Builders was a realization, admittedly 3 decades ago, across a whole lot of countries, that there was this population now who hit around 55 and their kids have grown up. Common sense says, if you think about it, like 20 years ago, if you hit 55, you probably had your kids when you're in your early 20s. So by the time you're in your mid 50s, your kids are in their 30s, right? You're probably more worried about the grandchildren than the children, right? But the thing is, the realization started to hit that, wait a minute, because of increasing longevity, in your 50s and early 60s, you still have 30 plus years to live. And so what are you going to do, right? Do you keep on slogging away until, the super kicks in? Is super enough? And of course, we have this growing issue in Australia of the realization for a lot of people that the super they have won't be enough, that the pension funds are under risk, that unemployment benefits, I see the Albanese government's changing some of the what over 55s can get in some of the different programs. But the reality of it is, it could be tough living, it could be luxurious living if you've got enough money. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do for the next 30 years, right? And sometimes that means I need to get another job, or I want another job, or I wouldn't mind another job, or I'd like to try something different. There's all sorts of different combinations of what that means and how that might impact employment opportunities, what companies have to think about.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the things that makes me think is, in years gone past, you would go to school, then you might do some kind of vocational education or university, or go straight into the workforce with the view of, here's my job for life. And that job for life would take you through till you were 55 or 60. With this stage that we've never seen before, it's really a complete paradigm shift. So I wonder, what are some of the ways that we can re-educate? I know, with marketing being your field of interest, what are some of the ways that we can help change this idea that, you have just the one job for life, but your career should positively follow multiple paths?
Well, I think partly if you're talking about kids your age or even mine who are around 30, that's a reality that's happening anyway. I mean, if you think about it, and obviously you're younger than me, but whenever you left school, as you say, you went off and you went to uni, or went and did a trade or something like that, and you thought you were going to be a plumber or an accountant for the rest of your life, right? But what we've seen is in the last 20, 30 years, even for people that are in their, late 40s, 50s, 60s now, a lot of them have gone through change. Now, they've gone through change because jobs have evolved, companies have evolved, specialties have evolved, totally new types of jobs have appeared that didn't exist before. I often use the example. My first degree was in library science. I was a public librarian. I read stories to little kids. When I was 30, I literally accidentally got a job at an ad agency. I didn't even know I was applying for a job at an ad agency when they gave me the job. And I learned a whole new career that then fortuitously for me led to me being able to live around the world and do all sorts of interesting stuff. But in the course of that, I also had to change because over the last 30 years, I had to learn all about market research, which I had no formal training in. I had to learn about production of TV films, which was great for 25 years and now is basically redundant, right? 8 years ago, when I started my own consultancy and started looking more at what were the narratives that businesses had to understand to increase their business, I learned how to use AI-based market research, which I've been using now for 8 years. So ChatGPT is actually just the new boy on the block. There's been programs like that around for decades. But imagine me in my 50s having to learn about AI, right? And obviously I can't write AI platforms, but I had to learn how to use it, how to think about it. That's become more and more normal for people of all ages. One of the things that we have to try to get across, and thanks again for inviting me to do this session and share it with your clients and your friends, is we have to have more discussions like this where a lot of companies are being exposed to the idea that change is inevitable, change is happening all the time, and usually faster than we plan for. Not faster than we predict, okay? Mm-hmm. We're always slow in our predictions, but in reality, we're all even slower at picking up on the change and adapting to it. And we have to understand that that's not a case of being, well, we must employ a bunch of 22-year-olds, because the evidence shows that there are 52, 62, 72-year-olds that are as quick at picking up on change and thinking differently and being able to do different types of work. But we have to have those discussions more. And for example, the sort of work you do in, sorry, I forgot the technological term, but requalification or,
recognition of prior learning. Yeah.
All that sort of stuff is fundamentally, for people of all ages and at all stages in their life. What's different is the ability to say, look, don't take it wrong, but I've been playing around doing this. I've got certain experiences. I need to be recognized for that. And by the way, recognize that I'm as competent as anybody else at doing it, right? No matter what my age is.
100%. And look, just picking up on that, Dave, I mean, the acknowledgement of a business for an individual, if they help to facilitate the older worker to gain a qualification through recognition of prior learning, it just fosters a sense of appreciation and loyalty amongst the employees, increases retention, reduces turnover, higher stability.
You raise, Campbell, you raise a really important point. Too often, over the decades I've been looking at these subjects, what I'll hear is that, well, we're really aiming for the future. So, keeping older people on is not really aiming for the future. And then you find out, now, this is the test I would give any of the companies that you deal with, right? When you look at your workforce, doesn't matter if you employ 1,000 people or 5 people, right? When you look at the workforce, what's the average turnover? And how long do people normally stay with your company? Now, if you think about it, and you look at, your kids are a bit young because they're still at school, but if you think about people in their 20s today, how often do they turn over jobs? Every 2, 3, 4 years, right? Now, it's proven again and again and again, if you want a workforce that is going to have an immediate impact and then continue to have an impact for 5, 10 years, go get yourself a 55-year-old, right? Now, and the other thing too, remember, in the Australian context, and we've seen this already in some other older marketplaces like Japan, for example, But we also know that people are not going to be retiring at 65. That some will, some people are beyond that $3 million super threshold thing for the new tax or whatever it is, right? Good on them. Well done. Most people are going to be continuing wanting to work, maybe not full-time, maybe part-time, whatever. So there's no excuse for a business not to be thinking, if you're thinking about, well, I've got a 5, a 10, a 20-year plan, people that are now in their 50s, perfect, right? Because they're going to give you all the experience. They're going to continue to learn if they're encouraged. Now, one of the things, and I heard this not recently from somebody in Korea, where they have a chronic aging marketplace issue, right? And they said to me, well, that's all very well, Dave, but, some of those people in their 50s and early 60s and stuff, they don't seem to show much interest. And I said, that's because you're not interested in them, right? If you kept on encouraging them in the same way you do with younger employees, and let's face it, a good company management is all about your employees first, your customers second, your investors third. Your priority must always be your staff and getting the most out of them. And the way to get the most out of them is to make them happy. So if that's recognition of their qualifications, I mean, it's not as simple as just saying we're going to give you a 5% pay rise every year. I've had jobs where I got
100%. Yeah.
Right. It's about qualification, it's recognition, it's encouragement, it's saying the right things at the right times.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that just comes back to an entrenched implied ageism, at a cultural level.
Right.
Just because they have been there a long time.
Right.
I think just picking up on that ageism in business and, it being more of a focus, I just wonder, I think that's an education piece again. Yeah. For the people in the organization, HR departments, and the organizations themselves.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'll be honest, in the last 2 years, I think, and I haven't quite figured this out, but I think propelled in some ways by the COVID shut-ins and the COVID world we lived in, I have seen an increase in interest in the aging population issue in a more positive way. By which I mean, I've seen more companies thinking about products and services aimed at people from 50s through to 100 at different levels. And one of the aging issues is that people confuse everybody from 60 to 100 as the same, right? Which is the same as saying that you and your teenage kids are the same, all right? It's insane, right? You don't do that. Why you would think somebody who's in their mid-60s or early 70s is the same as a 90-year-old is just, it doesn't work.
Absurd. Yeah.
But one of the things is that companies need to be reconsidering in the broader world the stuff they see around them, right? If you think about it, if you go in and talk to the managing director, the GM, or whatever senior management role of most companies, and I don't mean to be sexist, but we know it's probably more likely to be a guy, right? It's going to be a guy probably in his 50s, early 50s. And as I often point out, when I talk to audiences about this, I'll pull up pictures of old grandmother pictures of grandmothers in the 60s and the 70s, right? And I'll say, this is the problem you have. When you talk about aging population, you think about that. Some little old lady making a cake in the kitchen and all this sort of stuff. Now here's a 65-year-old woman today, and I don't mean the Jane Fonda, Helen Mirren, global. They look amazing for 98, but I mean a genuine average 65-year-old Australian woman today, and you look at her and you go, well, she doesn't look anything like that, right? Yeah. She looks younger. She's more vibrant. She on average is definitely a lot healthier. She'll live a lot longer. And you have to put that in people's faces because we have this mental thing about
preconception.
Well, it's a bit like I always point out. When I started looking at the subject in 1988, some sociologists referred to retirement as waiting for death.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we live in a world where we had that. Like and remember too, 30 years ago, if you heard somebody had died at 72, you'd go, oh, that was pretty good. Now, if somebody dies at 72, last week or the week before, I can't remember, some movie star died at 70, right? I was like, wow, that's so young, right? Yeah. Because now we expect everybody to live into their, if your own parents don't live into their 80s, 90s, it's almost like you've been shortchanged in life, right? And they've definitely been shortchanged.
100%. And so we're seeing the physical changes happen in people living longer, and that conversation needs to change to the cultural aspect of it. And I think the other thing to pick up on is, by extension, is that people who are healthier at that age, the population is healthier, want to keep working. And
this is exactly right. I'm in that age group. I'm in my mid-60s. Got a lot of friends who are around the same age group. This year is the 50th anniversary of leaving high school. So, I'll get back to Sydney later in the year and have a bit of a reunion and a few drinks with a bunch of mid-60s people, right? Now, what's interesting is, both professionally in the work I do and then socially, with people and friends I know, is, of course, I have a couple of friends who've literally retired, do nothing, whatever. One for a health reason, one because he can afford it, right? Most of the people I know, maybe they want to slow down to a part-time thing, a gig or whatever. But there's also those that are, okay, this is my chance. I owe nothing in the world. I've got no debts. And what am I going to do? Play golf 7 days a week? As one good friend of mine that tried that for 3 years said, Dave, after the first 3 months, I had to limit myself to twice a week so I didn't end up hating golf. It's just a reality. It's just a reality that, there's a lot of science that sort of says a typical Australian at 65 today historically has the body of a 45-year-old.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, what's happening now is we just physically, mentally want to do something. Now, why I use the term retirement, right, is because a lot of people will go through and sort of get to a point in life where I want to try and do something else.
Yes.
So when I started my consultancy nearly 8 years ago, yes, it's related to my career in advertising, but what I do now is more brand storytelling, and more importantly, I look at the demographics of your target markets and try to help companies understand how they got to shift to meet the new demographic challenges, right? So it was a small shift, but it was retrying in a different area. And as I said, then retrying to learn how to use AI research platforms and things.
Yes, the latest tools. Yes.
Right. Well, this is the other thing. People look around and they go, you know what? I've always been interested in that. I wouldn't mind trying that. Right. And it could be a slight shift within a company. How come you're giving all the younger guys the chance to do this and this? I'd love to have a chance to do that. Or it could be, a complete, I want to go back to university and learn to be an accountant, or whatever it is, right?
No, 100%, 100%. And this is the thing. I mean, we can't rely on preconceptions to limit people's choices, which brings me to the other part of the question, and that's the business itself, I guess, that maybe has this latent ageism that's entrenched in there. So, I mean, what do you notice is some of the biggest barriers to businesses accepting that hiring older workers is actually good for their business?
Well, as I said before, the first big barrier is time. The perception that if you hire older people, they're not going to, it's not worth investing in because they're not going to be around for long enough. And the argument that is, well, how long do you think an investment it has to be made? Because the reality is, if you get people to stay in a job for 5 years, you're doing pretty well, right? So that's one. The second thing is, and the most important thing today is, misconceptions around technical adaptability.
Yeah.
So the misconception that basically, if you're over 50, you can't learn to use a keypad. You'll never learn how to use this particular program. Now, remember, we're not asking most people to actually develop ChatGPT, right? We're asking people to, for example, very relevant the last 2 months is we're asking people, a lot of people of all sorts of businesses, to figure out there are so many of these new AI apps around. There's nearly always one relevant to your business, and there's always the challenge of like, how are we going to work with that, right? Well, wait a minute. Do you want to take that to somebody who's never had to adapt to a major technological change? And by the way, MIT itself said in a report only a few years ago that in the last 25 years, there had been no major technological innovation affecting business, because all of the technologies we think of, the platform we're using now, 25 years old, not the exact platform Zoom, but similar things, right?
Yeah.
Every major technology is over 25 years old. So is AI, but the new versions of AI are putting a lot of pressure on businesses. Now, can a 55 or a 65-year-old adapt to that? Well, the beauty of it is that age group is used to adapting to new technologies.
Yes.
And so remember, who were the first people that had to learn to use spreadsheets, right? They're the people that are now in their late 50s and 60s, right? And all other forms of software, like literally teleconferencing, which Zoom is just a modified version of that, right?
Yeah.
So actually, if you think about it, if you're looking at people that it can adapt to new technologies, that can deal with change, you should be looking at people over 55, right? They are the people that are proven to be able to adapt to change. Now, the other thing too is, more importantly, the third element is not just adapting to technology, but experience with life, right? And experience with situations. So I know in your business, and we were saying before we started recording, you've made a bit of a pivot with your business because experience taught you there must be a better way to recruit customers, right? And so you pivoted the way you do that. And from what you're telling me, it's been quite successful in the last year or so, right? Well, that's the other thing, is that no matter what business you're in, and it could be that you're a tradie, it could be, you're running a big corporation, there will be people who can help you think about how to do things in a slightly different way, based on experience, from life advice. And that life, sometimes we get this confused. Life advice is usually telling your son about, settle down with a good woman, or telling your daughter, well, when you go for a job, ask these questions, right? But life advice can also be very instrumental inside an institution, inside a company, inside an organization. What have you really learned? Not as a manager. So, I had very senior roles in a very, very big global ad agency. I ran offices of 900 staff, right? But what I learned very early on, it was some of the people that had never got past the mid-level, that were in their 50s and had never got past mid-level and would never be senior managers. But their advice was fantastic because they'd been in the trenches with the difficult moments, right? And the exact nature of the difficult moment might be different, but how you cope with that, right?
Yes.
What can the business do? What's your learning? For example, for a project I'm just doing at the moment, I was very interested. I asked the managing director of I'm in Thailand, it's a Thai company here. I asked him some questions when I was interviewing him as part of the beginning of the project. What was interesting was when I then turned around and said, now what I'd like to do is I'd like your help. Do you have 6 mid-level staff who speak pretty good English, because my Thai is pathetic, but do you have 6 good mid-level experienced people that I could talk to about, why would you want to ask them? Well, because I wanted to ask them how they think the company is approaching this, or what are the challenges around. Why would they know? Well, because they're mid-level managers and they're managing what they're supposed to be implementing your big idea, but making sure it can work.
Yes.
And I hit that boundary of, but, they're not really sharp thinkers, because otherwise they wouldn't be middle managers. And you're going,
missing the point.
Okay, that's the point why I want to talk to them.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that rings so true in terms of resilience. having had life experiences to build things like resilience and adaptability, but also having a wider network. You know, you've you've got more people to draw on to either come up with new ideas or solve difficulties or so on. You know, I think that, you know, that concerns about longevity and retirement is and perceived higher costs. I think the reality is it's a lack of awareness of the benefits. Yes. And it's like everything, it's don't focus on, oh, what are the negative things, or what are the incredible, you know, positive things that someone in their 50s or 60s.
Right. A lot of it's got to do with just day-to-day stuff, right? It's just day-to-day stuff. Like, oh, how do we do this? How do we cope with this? What do we do? Like when you were in your last, you know, you're 55, you're 57 years of age, right? You might have had 4 jobs in your life. We know, like your 27-year-old, like my son, you know, might have had 4 jobs in his life. By 27, typical 57-year-old might be 4 jobs. But if you sit there and you go, like, what did you do, or what happened with your other company when they went through this, right?
Yeah,
simple things like that. Not from a senior management role, but from all levels, right? But the other side of it too, Campbell, is thinking companies need to think through the simple fact that increasingly in the future, the people that are buying your products and services are going to be in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. The proportion of that population is the only one that's growing.
Yeah. No,
and so, you know, realistically, it doesn't matter what your business, right? You know, again, you know, if you think about it, you've got a lot of experience, and as you're talking to companies, you're able to explain things from that experience. Yep. Well, think about, I'm a company and I'm developing, and I'll give you an example. I was talking to a company about a project to launch a sports drink, a new type of sports drink. We talked about it, and I said, you know who your target should be? It's the thousands and thousands of Australians that in their middle age get right back into things like cycling, right? You know, every weekend in major Australian cities, if you're up at 7 a.m. on a Sunday, you'll see a cloud of guys going past, you know, and women, a cloud of people going past, and they're all middle-aged, right? Or older. And so that rejuvenation, that reinterest that we've seen dramatically increase in the last 10 years in people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, basically retrying sport in some way, right?
100%. Because, and that's the other thing, you know, it comes back to, you know, we're talking about at 65, if you're mentally fitter and physically fitter, then you're more able-bodied to want to pick up, you know, sport.
And so that's why when I use the term retirement, admittedly, when working with a team many years ago, we first came across this term, but we meant specifically retrying occupations. But then the realization was, no, it's retrying every aspect of life, right? It's retrying hobbies. It's retrying exercise. It's retrying diets. It's retrying different food types. It could be retrying travel if you can afford it. It could be just retrying reading different types of books, you know, or just retrying finding a new hobby to do. It's everything about life. And why I talk it's a new life stage is because up until very recent history, because of life expectancy issues and all the rest, as we talked about before, most people, unfortunately, didn't live past their mid-70s. And so literally what was happening was we had life stages low as you were a kid, you were a teenager, basically breaking sweat on doing naughty stuff. You were a young family guy, you were middle-aged, and then you were retired or waiting to die, right? But now we have this 20-year thing that's consistently, I'm not middle-aged anymore, but I'm not in that last 10, 15 years of life anymore. I've got 20 years of fairly healthy, fairly active, fairly mentally fine life. I got to do something.
Yeah, 100%. And it's that opportunity to do things that you might have wanted to do, but never had the time or
Right.
the income or
Or
whatever.
to your or to your business, I may not have a qualification for it, right? I've done a lot of it, but I don't have the piece of paper, right?
Oh,
I don't have
100%, 100%, Dave. It's quite common that we will work with a client that is older than 50, and they might be trying to get a diploma or an advanced diploma of leadership and management, and they'll go through the evidence requirements, and the knowledge evidence questions, and often at the end of the process they'll go, wow, that was really a cathartic experience, because, I'd forgotten that I knew all those things. Or I didn't know what I knew once I really started delving into, what I've done and what I've achieved. Because so often when you're in a working life, you're so busy managing change and innovation and continuous improvement that, you do it and there's no time to stop. As soon as you've implemented some kind of new thing, it's, work from home because of COVID. All right, we're on to the next thing, and then the next thing. And recognition of prior learning and gaining a qualification through that process is a chance for you to put a flag, a signpost in the ground saying, wow, look, I've achieved all these things, and here's formal recognition of it. And it's a really, really powerful, really powerful process to go through.
Yesterday, for a international professional body, I won't say what profession, right? Because they'll hate the fact I mention them. Because what I did was they were asking for people to apply to speak at a global conference. And the opening 3 questions on the application was, what's your age, what's your sex, and what's your name, your age, and your sex. And I wrote, my proposal was all about, I want to talk about, why the hell do you ask my age? What difference does it make how old I am? Now, I meant it in a genuine sense. For example, the way they had one of those things, you got to feel, you got to hit the tab. Through the years, if you were under 20, there was
no option. Yeah,
there's no option, right? And my thing was, it doesn't matter whether I'm 67 or 17. If I've got something really worthwhile saying, shouldn't you allow me the opportunity, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And why does it matter? Now, of course, when you ask the sex thing now, they always have male, female, other, or choose not to, right?
Yeah.
But how come they don't do that with the age thing? The age thing is irrelevant.
100%, 100%. And look, I think it's an education process, mainstream media, but it's not a sexy topic for mainstream media to talk about. So it's
but I will say this. No, I will say this, Campbell, to be fair. As I said, the last 2 years, I've seen some more companies in all sorts of businesses start to rethink this. I've seen some more professional bodies start to raise more issues around it or get more interested in it. I am seeing some more reporting about it, but it's usually, as usually happens, the mainstream media, whether it's online or offline mainstream media, it's the exaggerated ends of it, right, that get reported. Yeah. But we are starting to see a bit more, and this is why thank you to you, because you showed the interest. We talked a year ago, we're talking again now. And what I'm finding interesting is that, I'm not saying you weren't interested before, but it's sort of the fact you invited me the first time was sort of incidental, right? Sort of, it just happened because we met through other reasons. But now I'm starting to see, not just me, but I'm seeing a lot of people starting to talk and listen to this a bit more. Not enough, but it's moving it slowly in the right direction. And hopefully, if this session gets one company or one manager in a company to rethink the attitudes a little bit, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, look, and I think that's a great point, and it's a great final question as well, Dave. I think, if there was one key takeaway that you could say to a leader or manager that, in an organization that's watching, what we've spoken about today in life stages and new life builders, what would be one key takeaway that they can then go back to their organization and to start on the journey?
I think the key thing is in that name I gave to this group, New Life Builders, right? is if you're in business today, if you've got a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a 50-year plan, very unlikely, right? Most companies 5-10-year plans. And what you have to focus on is your end consumers, your end customers are more and more likely to be people in that age group. You need to be thinking about how your company is going to cope with that change. And you probably have a resource already in the company, or that you can get into the company, which is people that are moving or in that age group. And you can use them both for internally developing ideas, refining ideas, but just also for coping with the changing world that is an older marketplace. And that would be just logical to me.
Makes perfect sense. Dave, great to catch up again. Thanks again for your time.
Thanks very much, Campbell. Talk to you soon.
Cheers.